Entering the Mixed View Zone with your host, Laverne.
Hello, MVVs. It is 6 o'clock. It is Friday, so you know what time it is. It is time for Mixed Views with Laverne. I hope that all of you had a wonderful weekend. And if you didn't, you've tuned into Mixed Views, so it is about to get exponentially better. And if you had a great week, well, hey, Mixed Views is your icing on the cake. I am so excited to be back. I gave you guys a week off just so that you could prepare for this show. I am excited to get started. I want us to use every minute of the time that we have. I encourage all of you to make sure if you got a question, let's ask the professional. I'm sure if he is able to answer, he will. And if he can, he won't make something up. So let's get started. If you saw our flyer this week, then you know we're going to be talking about understanding the Hawksbill Creek Agreement. That has been such a hot button topic, so to speak, in the recent weeks. And we just want to really talk about it. But you know, most of all, MVVs, I like to educate you guys. I like to make sure that you are aware so that when we have these conversations, we are spitting facts and not fictions and not feelings, right? Melanie, thank you so much for tuning in. Melanie, you know when you don't tune in, I notice that. I just want you to know. I notice when you don't tune in. So when you tune in, that makes it so much better. So thank you, Melanie. And to those of you who are not posting in the comments, but I see that you are tuning in, thank you. Thank you so much for tuning in to Mixed Views. So listen, he is ready to go. Mr. Moss is ready to go. And so we want to get started. Let's go ahead and introduce our guest. Hi, Audrey. Thank you so much for tuning in. Listen, Audrey, you're new and automatically you are an MVV. Okay? So thank you so much for tuning in, Audrey Jolly. So let's talk about our guest. Gregory K. Moss was born in Nassau, New Providence. Mr. Moss graduated from Freeport Anglican High School in 1983, and from 1983 through 1985, he attended the College of the Bahamas, graduating with an Associate of Arts degree. Mr. Moss furthered his education at the University of West Indies in Barbados from 1985 to 1989, where he obtained a Bachelor's of Laws degree. From 1989 to 1991, he attended the Council of Legal Education, Norman Manley Law School in Jamaica, where he obtained the professional practicing qualification of a Certificate of Legal Education. Mr. Moss has held many occupational positions after graduating from law school, including that of an acting stipendiary and circuit magistrate, and of a lecturer in law at the Institute of Business and Commerce. He is presently the proprietor of Moss and Associates Law Chambers. His civic and political involvements have included various positions such as the treasurer of the Bahamas Bar Association, a member of the College of the Bahamas Advisory Committee, Northern Campus, and of the College of the Bahamas Strategic Planning Committee, Northern Campus, a director of Bahamas Air Holdings Limited, president of the Grand Bahama Chamber of Commerce, chairman of the National Insurance Board, and member of parliament for the Marco City constituency. He is also the proud father of 5 children, Edward, Gabrielle, William, Grace, and Christopher Moss, and is married to the lovely Miss Crystal Martin Moss. MVVs, please help me welcome Attorney Greg Moss.
Good day.
Hi,
good day.
welcome again.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
It is a pleasure to have you. And so, as we said in our pre-talk, we want to talk about the Hawksbill Creek Agreement, just so that we get a working, an understanding of what it is, what it means. We've seen recently, whether it's the Prime Minister who's saying that investors don't have confidence in Grand Bahama, but now the news is saying that Grand Bahama is on the uprise. So I don't know what miracle was worked behind the scenes, but from that, from the Port Authority, then I guess going on a kind of a campaign to make Bahamians believe, or to correct the prime minister by saying, hey, investors are here. We saw the march from the business community of Grand Bahama. Consequently, there's a meeting schedule, if it hasn't been changed, for the 28th with citizens and business owners who have concerns. And so we've seen all of that. And in the middle of all of that is this document that started out, I believe, in 1955. So
Yes, it
I
is.
think that's the right date. And so we want to talk about that because that, I believe, plays such an impact on Grand Bahama and everything that is happening in Grand Bahama, not just Freeport. So let's begin with that. What is this Hawksbill Creek Agreement, and which area really does it pertain to?
The Hawksbill Creek Agreement is an agreement which was entered into between the government of the Bahamas and a private company. It's very unusual to see that happen. In fact, in the world at large, we've very rarely seen that happen. And it's best to understand it maybe in the context of what we saw happen between England and China about 200 years ago with Hong Kong. Hong Kong was carved out of China as a jurisdiction in China, but under the government of the UK, and it recently returned back to China. The Hawksbill Creek Agreement did something very, very similar. It carved out an area in a sovereign country and gave effective governance over that area to a private company for 99 years. The Hawksbill Creek Agreement is not one document. And when people say to you, go and read the Hawksbill Creek Agreement, that is a very onerous task to impose on even attorneys, but almost an impossible task to impose on people. The Hawksbill Creek Agreement started off with a document dated 4th August 1955, which is conveniently referred to as the Principal Agreement. It laid out the general provisions, and I'll go back to them in a moment. It was amended in 1960 and again in 1966. Two amendments. There is effectively a third amendment, which no one speaks about, because it wasn't amended through Parliament. It was amended by agreement between the Port Authority itself and the government of the Bahamas.
So let's just stop right there. Is that normal?
Well, it's the Hawksbill Creek Agreement is an agreement. It has the force of law, but it has never been legislated into effect. It has the force of law because that's how the courts interpret it. But there's a statute which made provision for the government to sign the Hawksbill Creek Agreement. And so the statute was passed into law. The agreement was then signed. The case law says that has the effect of causing the agreement to operate like a statute, like legislation, like an act. All those three words mean the same thing. And so technically it could have been amended simply by agreement between the parties, and it was. And so in 1968, and that date is important, remember the Bahamas achieved majority government in 1967. Prior to that, it was a minority government, a government that many people internationally were very comfortable with. But when the majority government came into power, many people internationally became uncomfortable, and those people included the shareholders in the Grand Bahama Port Authority Limited. So they approached the government around the election date, actually in 67, but consummating in 68, 14th September 1968. And they approached the government to have a new deal, which was essentially to say to the government, we don't like leaving our shares in the Bahamas because the Port Authority is a domestically incorporated company.
Right.
And so they said, let us move our shares, the shareholders, out of the Bahamas into, as it turned out, the Philippines, into a company called Bengay Holdings. And so they were not able to do that without the consent of the government because the government had their shares in the Bahamas. And in return for the government agreeing to do that, they did something incredible, which has not effectively been enforced in the Bahamas since that date. First, they agreed that the government would have a 7.5% ownership in the Port Authority. Grand
Right.
Bahama Port Authority Limited. People don't speak about that, but the government is one of the shareholders of the Grand Bahama Port Authority Limited. That brings certain rights and
As
that
a
also,
shareholder.
as a shareholder, including rights to dividends and rights to the sale of assets and so on that have never been explored. But in addition to that, and more importantly, I suppose for today's discussion, the Port Authority also agreed to roll back, return, give up certain powers they had under the Hawksbill Creek Agreement itself.
Mm.
And those powers which they gave up, this is a very general way of stating it, included the right to issue licenses without the consent of the government. That's a very important statement.
So every license has to be approved by the government
I'll
because
put it different.
initially the agreement, when I was reading through this
Hmm.
copious amounts of information, that was
Hmm.
one of the things that the initially with the agreement, they had the Grand Bahama Port Authority had the right to issue licenses as they saw fit without any
Yes.
approval from the government.
And I said I would say that slightly differently. The way I
Okay.
would put it is that the government has the right to enforce the obligation of the Port Authority to vet those licenses through the government. That
Okay.
is done. That is done in a sense. There's something called the National Economic Council, which is not a formal body. It is really a subcommittee of cabinet itself, and it's made up of those ministers who the prime minister from time to time decides should sit on that committee. But
Right.
essentially, that committee serves as a liaison between the central bank and the cabinet, and also between the Port Authority and the cabinet. And that committee tends to raise its head whenever there's a big project going on in the Bahamas, and says to the central bank and to the Port Authority if it involves the port area, talk to us about this before you approve these things.
Okay.
I'm not going to comment on whether they should be doing that with the central bank. They really shouldn't, but let's
I
leave that
didn't
alone.
understand their
Yeah,
involvement in it, but I was
yeah.
just going to go with it.
Let's leave that alone for a second. But they
Right.
do have that power with the Port Authority and certain other powers, including the power to direct the port to issue licenses. But
Mm.
generally speaking, the port continues to hold all the powers under the Hawksbill Creek Agreement, but subject to oversight whenever the government wants in terms of the exercise of those powers. But governments from time to time have not apparently used that oversight power, but it is there. So that's a background.
Right.
In terms
And
of
that
what,
was it's important to establish that background because I don't know about my viewers, but you sometimes get the impression it's almost like well, we don't really know what's going on. They're a body unto themselves, which they are, but it's like we don't have a clue. And so, you need to speak with them or we need to see them because we don't know. And I'm saying from a government standpoint, that's almost the feeling that you get.
yeah, if any government, and I'm putting it that widely because I don't want to be seen as speaking in favor or against any of
Oh,
these
right.
parties, and honestly, I'm not. If any government claims not to know what's going on in the Port Authority, it's because they don't want to know. A part of the Bengay Agreement gave them the right to put a member on the board of directors, one of a government representative on the board of directors of the Port Authority, and we had government representatives for years. But also to call for records, to call for papers, to see what's going on, and as I said, to insist on vetting any application for a license from the Port Authority, from anyone to the Port Authority, and it even goes so far in the Bengay Agreement, the 1968 agreement, to say, and if the Port Authority decides to refuse any license, they must inform the government that they propose to refuse a license, and the government may direct them to, quote, favorably reconsider that application, meaning give the license even though you don't want it.
Right. Even though they initially said no.
Yeah. What the Bengay Agreement didn't do, unfortunately, is close a loop in the Hawksbill Creek Agreement itself, which says expressly that the Port Authority has the right to license businesses in the port area without any oversight as to terms of licenses from the government. So they could charge you what they want. They can impose royalties. They can do all sorts of things. Now, there is a series of cases in the Supreme Court which established that the Port Authority, although it's one company, exercises two very, very different functions. One of the functions is a private company making profits, which is legitimate.
Right.
The other function, when it relates to the issuing of licenses, is a quasi-governmental function, meaning you're really acting on behalf of the government in issuing these licenses. And once you
Correct.
realize that, that governmental function then becomes a function that is subject to supervision from the courts. And so I said that there's no provision in the Hawksbill Creek Agreement restricting the conditions they can impose on the issuance of a license, but there are provisions through the courts by which the court can have oversight over that to say this is unreasonable, this is extortionary, this is whatever else. And so strictly speaking and immediately there's no provision, but indirectly through that recognition of the court that the Port Authority is really acting on behalf of the government, and the
There
court
is a way.
right through judicial review to supervise or review any action of the government, the courts do ultimately have the right to review that.
Okay.
Okay.
And so it's not as hands off I think as we've been led to believe.
For the average person who cannot afford to go to court, it is. It's
Okay.
very arbitrary, it's very discretionary. But for big investors who say, listen, I want to do business here and I will not allow my company to be subject to these terrible terms, it is not. They can afford to go to court. And it's an unfortunate dichotomy there that the big guys have a recourse, but the small guys don't.
Isn't that always the case though? Or it feels like that's always the case.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we look at the Hawksbill Creek Agreement and the Grand Bahama Port Authorities, which really just outlines their responsibilities, what they are going to do or should be doing,
And their rights.
and their rights.
Mm-hmm.
When we look at that, and now let's look at the state of Freeport. Let's just say Freeport. We're not going to go into the eastern, western parts of the island. We're going to say Freeport because that is, according to the agreement, where their major responsibilities lie. What is happening from your point of view?
Well, if I could, before getting to that, and I understand that's the meat of the matter, if I could just have 2 or 3 minutes to just add one more context to it.
I'm going to give you 5.
Rights, thank you, rights and responsibilities.
Yes.
Then I can get to that more subjective question, and I'll do my best to answer it. But in terms of rights and responsibilities, it's very interesting that the oversight or the grant given to the Grand Bahama Port Authority under the Hawksbill Creek Agreement was in respect of an area known as the port area. It was defined in that way. So it's not the whole of Grand Bahama. It is an area in Grand Bahama. There was provision or is provision in the principal agreement to extend that area from time to time to almost all of the rest of Grand Bahama. And some extensions have been made. But much of Grand Bahama remains outside of the port area. But it's very interesting in that the name of the company is not the Freeport Port Authority Limited. It's the Grand Bahama Port Authority Limited. And I think that distinction bears looking at, because although the immediate and direct involvement of the Grand Bahama Port Authority Limited was intended to be the port area, the effect of the Hawksbill Creek Agreement was intended to benefit and affect the entire island of Grand Bahama.
Yeah.
And so sometimes you miss that, and I think sometimes the Port Authority itself misses that although they're the licensor for the port area, they have a obligation and a right to affect all development in Grand Bahama. So for instance, there's nothing wrong with the Port Authority, for instance, saying to a developer, we will help you and assist you and spur you on with development in the port area, but we want to see the effect of that development reaching into other areas of Grand Bahama. Yes, for instance, you're going to be a hotel operation in the port area, but we would like to see the cruise ships, the private yachts developed, the facilities developed in West End, because that will spill over into the licensees of rental cars, the licensees of rooms, and so on in the port area, and just employment in general in the island of Grand Bahama. That's just a conceptual issue. But in terms of rights and responsibilities, let me just lay them out quickly. Many people will read the first Hawksbill Creek Agreement, the 1955 one, and say, oh, what the Port Authority had the responsibility for providing hospitals and schools and government building and government accommodations, and those were in there, but those were taken out. They were taken out in subsequent amendments. The trades were made, and those were taken out.
Right. In 1966, they took that out.
Precisely. And so those are gone. Many people would also say, oh, the Port Authority, looking at the first agreement, only leases land in the port area. And therefore, how can they be selling it? Well, that was undone also because land was conveyed to the Port
Yes.
Authority subsequent to the first agreement. And so those things can be deceiving if you just read the first agreement and believe that's the Hawksbill Creek Agreement. But overall, speaking overall, the Port Authority has the right to license businesses of all kinds in the port area, has a right generally to set the fees for that license, has the obligation to spur on development of businesses in the port area. And that's where we tend to have this dispute with them, had initially a right to bypass whomever they wanted in. That was done away with. Had initially an obligation to hire Bahamians whenever Bahamians were available and not to
Yes.
bring in foreigners. And that has not been taken out, but it's just not observed anymore.
Right. I want to just for I also saw that even there was a clause in there. There is a
Mhm.
clause in there that says that even if you have to hire foreigners,
You must train
you
local people.
you must train local
Mhm.
people. It could only be for, I think, 3 years.
Yes.
And then if you needed to renew it, you could only renew it once.
Hmm. Yeah, but that's not observed anymore. And I'm not
Is
saying
it
it's,
not observed or was it taken out? I didn't see
I
where
don't
it was
recall it
ever
being taken
amended.
out.
Right.
I
I
don't
was
recall it
looking
being
through,
taken
but
out.
I didn't see that.
And in fact, it was in many of the original licenses that the port issued, because it had this obligation and therefore it wanted to not be found to have shirked that obligation by the actions of its licensees. So it put that provision expressly in the old licenses, but somewhere along the way they stopped putting the provision in the old licenses and they stopped enforcing that provision. And so it's a mixed bag now of what of the approach to that. But in return for those obligations, the port got certain rights. And those rights were by and large, again, the licensing right, but also taxation rights. That there were certain rights of taxation generally in terms of direct taxes, excises, personal property tax, income tax, and so on, that were exempted for 30 years. And there were also real property tax and so on for 30
Yes.
years. And then there were other taxes which were exempted for the full 99 years of the lease, which were of the Hawksbill Creek Agreement, which were generally speaking, again, taxes in respect of import and export. Import of goods, you import them conditionally duty free. That's a phrase we
Yes.
use. It's not in the agreement, but that's a phrase custom uses, meaning you bring goods in, they go under a bond, you don't pay the duty once you use the goods for the purpose of the business. So they're entered conditionally duty free. If you don't use them for the purpose of the business, you have to pay duty plus a fine. If you do use them for the purposes of the business, the obligation goes away. The goods are consumed in the process of the business. And then you had other taxes which were exempted for the life of the agreement, essentially export taxes from the port area and generally from the Bahamas itself into any other country. So you can bring in all the components for doing any business here, conditionally duty free. Bonded is the word we use on the street.
Right.
You bring in those goods without paying duty. You bring in those components without paying duty. You manufacture some product or goods, and you export it without paying any duty also. And that's really the magic of the Hawksbill Creek Agreement.
Okay. It's magic is an interesting.
For the Magic City, I know.
Yeah. Well, no, let's not go there. I think that's
Yeah.
part of the problem. We keep trying to recreate what was instead of looking at what we have and pivoting from there. But that's going to be for another show. So
Yes.
we get to this place now where we are.
Mhm.
Recently, there was the Grand Bahama Business Outlook, and there were a number of initiatives that are in the pipe between the government and also the announcements made by the Grand Bahama Port Authority in terms of what is coming, what has already started, and all of that. And I found it interesting because prior to that, we hadn't heard anything about anything. And then we have these agreements, the government is saying in May, we will have a hospital and it's groundbreaking for the hospital. And I thought that was a good point that you mentioned because a lot of us walked around with the impression that that was the responsibility of the Grand Bahama Port Authority, when in actuality it is not. The agreement says that they can have a hospital and that they can charge for this hospital, a private hospital that provides state of the art, whatever they thought state of the art was back those many months ago, but certainly not that they were responsible for providing a hospital. So that means that us having a hospital does lie squarely on the shoulders, then, if I'm interpreting correctly, of the Bahamas government.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. In terms of enforceable obligations, you can't force the Port Authority to build a hospital or to improve the one that's there now. And so, yes, in that sense. But in another sense, it should be a partnership, because when you look at the Hawksbill Creek Agreement purely from a business perspective, you would think the persons who own the Grand Bahama Port Authority Limited would want to ensure that businesses are successful in the port area and in wider Grand Bahama, because it would benefit them directly financially to do so.
Absolutely.
A larger population would lead to more businesses, more licenses, more opportunities for growth. And so I don't want to get stuck on the hospital point, but to the extent that, let me put it this way, all governments, and remember the Port Authority is like a government, a quasi-government. There are three levels of government in Grand Bahama. There are only two in the other islands. In Grand Bahama, we have the central government, the people we elect. We have the local government. We have the Port Authority, frankly, if we go in order of power.
Right.
We have the Port Authority itself, and then we have local government. And so we have to deal with three levels of government. We have to deal with with at least two levels of expenses. Take the airport. You have departure tax, but you also have airport taxes. And this is the problem with all of Grand Bahama. There's a overabundance of taxes being taken out of the people's pockets without recognizing that the people are then disadvantaged compared to the rest of the country. But back to the point I was trying to make, most governments that try to attract businesses into their countries or into their states or their local districts in the US, they do so based on two things that they offer. They offer land and they offer tax exemptions. That is the way to attract international businesses. And that becomes their contribution to what is essentially a public-private partnership. They don't say it's a partnership, but they say, if you come into our area and we're allowed to exact some taxes from you, we know we'll get paid on the back end. So we'll provide land to you and we'll do tax exemptions. The Port Authority has that same position available to it. And the government indirectly has that position through its influence on the Port Authority, which is to say the largest single component most of the times, taxes, obligations are gone under the Hawksbill Creek Agreement by and large. Yeah. And land is available to the port area because that was the foundation on which the agreement was built.
With the agreement, right.
The challenge with the Port Authority and with business development in Grand Bahama, though, is that like many things, the port has divested itself of so many valuable assets that it has very little chips left on the table to play with.
What do you mean?
Well, the Port Authority's income was anticipated under the Hawksbill Creek Agreement. Its income now is essentially business license fees and service charges. But under the agreement, it was to include all utilities. So telephone, water, electricity, cable, all of those were revenue bases under the initial Hawksbill Creek Agreement. The Port Authority sold those out. And so much of their income stream went with selling those out. And so the only two income streams they have left are license fees and service charges. Service charges are by and large fixed, except for new conveyances. And so they only have been able to increase their income stream in respect of service charges by imposing higher service charges on new conveyances of land. And the income stream in respect of business license fees have been increased. We've seen that almost every year.
I know, Greg, you probably can't answer this, but let's take a step. Why? Why would you make such a business decision?
Oh, I don't know. I wouldn't even.
I would hazard a guess. You would make such a business decision.
It was the immediate money in those days from selling off those assets. One would think that was the motivation.
But then it doesn't give you anything to leverage.
And therefore, you come to the question of what's left. And what's left, again, the tax exemptions under the Hawksbill Creek Agreement, which are either for the remainder of the 99 years or have been consistently extended by the government. So that's on the table. What's left is land. And the Port Authority divested itself of land. The land that's seen under the Hawksbill Creek Agreement itself was divested by the Port Authority in a few ways. One, they kept very, very little land under the name of the Grand Bahama Port Authority Limited. They put their commercial land in a company called Freeport Commercial and Industrial Limited, which they do own still. And they put most of the residential land in a company called Grand Bahama Development Company Limited, which started off being theirs, but they sold a 50% interest to Hutchison Whampoa Limited, meaning that the Chinese have a 50% interest in the land in the port area.
Residential area.
Much as they did with the airport and certain a few other things. And so on paper, the Port Authority does have the right to provide tremendous incentive for businesses to come in. But to the extent that most of that residential land, when I say residential, I mean not just single family, I mean hotels. I mean all the land. I mean other than industrial land. Most of that residential land is now owned jointly by the Port Authority and Hutchison Whampoa in Grand Bahama Development Company Limited. So it might be more difficult to give incentives to promote businesses, which will only benefit the Port Authority side of that ownership through license fees, not the Hutchison Whampoa side of that ownership. Right. And so it becomes a bit of a more difficult task. But on paper, theoretically, more than theoretically, on paper, there's land and there are tax exemptions, and those should be sufficient to attract business, schools, investments, etc. So the real question is, if they are still on the table, why are those things not coming to Grand Bahama? Right. The answer to that is a little surprising, but I'll give you a moment. But that's the question, really, in my mind. Why are those things?
Listen, I don't like surprises, so I want to get to the answer. I was only thinking, with you saying that, I was only thinking that perhaps this is the disconnect, because where we find ourselves now, we were not always in this place, right? Mm-hmm. And so I'm thinking to myself, is the disconnect now because, like you said, they've divested themselves of so much that there isn't a lot really and truly that they can offer. Mm-hmm. And so I'm thinking, is that why we have a disconnect now? Because I'm trying to figure out why does it appear to be so difficult now when years before it worked? Something was working and now it's not. But let's get to the answer, because like I said, I don't like surprises.
I think the answer, I could always say words and they may just be my opinion, and, what is that worth, in the scheme of things? Not that I'm diminishing myself, but people are hurting right now. They want to see something and have some confidence that it's real. And so the answer to my mind, in a way that most people will align with, is to remember what happened with the Princess Hotel, the Princess Casino, Zafredi Laker.
Yes.
Remember that? How easy it was to bring tourists, for instance, into Grand Bahama. Grand Bahama has more beaches, more wide roads, more open scenery than anywhere else in the whole Bahamas. And given the opportunity to come here, tourists tend to prefer to come here for fun, and which is why I heard what you said about the Magic City, but I would invite you to open your mind to that again, because right now the hottest real estate market in the US is Florida. One of the hottest real estate markets in Florida is Palm Beach. You have people moving into Florida with money. The retirement community in the US is just exploding. I mean, it's massive. And also the warm weather happens to be in the South. And so the Florida real estate market should be reflected in the value of real estate in Grand Bahama. We're only 40 minutes away. We're only a few minutes away by a fast plane. We're within range of the private cruise ships and so on. And I don't mean the ones we go on, I mean the yachts. Right. And so the question is, why is it that you have this overflowing demand for real estate in a warm tropical environment with good infrastructure, electricity, telephone, cable, restaurant, all of these things, and that demand is not overflowing into Grand Bahama? Why is it that a bit of that demand overflowed into Bimini the other day? And the challenge seems to be that it's too expensive to come to Grand Bahama. As a resident here, you know what it costs for us to go right to Florida and come back.
Yes.
It's obscene how much money, but that is a reflection of the agreement that's in place between the government and the Port Authority. When you look at 2 points, one, volume of people coming here affects the price on the aircraft, but two, taxation and the fact that we're being doubly taxed at the airport with departure tax and with the Port Authority taxes. And I know it's it's kind of the flavor of the month to blame the Port Authority, and I don't agree with that view. The Port Authority or the airport company, one of their subsidiaries, needs the money to run the airport. The government uses departure tax in Nassau to run the Nassau airport.
Yes.
The government does not use departure taxes in Freeport to help in any way with the Freeport airport.
So where does the tax go?
Public treasury. The departure tax in Freeport is not for the benefit of the development and management of the airport. So it shouldn't be here. It should not be allowed here. And it is giving an artificial price to our tickets to come here. That's one. But the other one is that it's a chicken and egg situation. You won't get the airlines to come here in volume, meaning reduce the price because they have their seats filled, unless there is a demand on this side for people to come here. You need the fun here. You need the accommodation here. You need the amenities here. You need the restaurants and all these things here, where people can come and say, I'm going to a destination in order to drop the ticket price. But you need the ticket price dropped in the mind of many developers in order for them to say, oh, let us go and develop something in Freeport. The point is that the first developer is a developer that's going to take the hit. After that is established and the pipe is unclogged and the ticket prices go down and the amenities come up, all more developers would come. And so the question is, how are we going to attract that first developer?
That first
developer. And the answer has to be that we have to subsidize these ticket prices between here in the US to start with. People don't like talking about it. They say Bahamas uses a lot of government money. At the end of the day, either subsidize the business or subsidize social services and pay people something for a job they don't have. One way or the other, the government is involved in the business of subsidies until the economy is sufficiently strong to maintain itself. It's like starting the engine. Remember the old days you used to see them cranking the engine?
Yeah.
Once the engine started, you don't
crank it up and then jump in.
Once it started, you don't have to keep cranking. You let it go and the engine runs by itself once you put fuel in it. But it's that cranking. Or the example that I guess I would use more is, you remember, for those of us who grew up a long time ago, you have the well and you have to pour water down the hand pump. You have to prime that pump. It's the same point.
I'm very familiar with that.
Exactly. And so to say that the Port Authority must prime the pump is misconceived. To say that the government must prime the pump and just pour money into the port area without it going into businesses, which will then keep the pump running, is misconceived. It has to be a partnership between that. And at the end of the day, I know we have the Lukaya and we're talking about our hopes and prayers that it will be sold soon, but bear this in mind. If you get Lukaya running again, and you get the airport running again, and you get the hospital up and running again, that just takes us to 2015, when this economy was not working. That is not enough. That is not near enough. It takes us to 2015. So instead of complaining, let's look at some solutions. One easy solution is this. The Hawksbill Creek Agreement and the development of the port area was centered around not just industry. It started off there, but they quickly realized industry is not sufficient to support the port area. It's not. It's a few people working, making high salaries, but it's just a few people working. It doesn't support the development of this area, the city of Freeport or wider Grand Bahama. Industry and tourism does. Together do. And so that's why the tourism component was added to the Hawksbill Creek Agreement after the first agreement.
Yes, and the second one was when the amendment was put in to build at least a 200-room luxury resort.
There you go. And so you see, again, not just in someone's opinion, but you see the evolution of what could make Freeport work. Industry alone is not good enough.
Right.
We like to say, I hear a lot of people saying, forget tourism. Tourism doesn't work. Let's focus on the industrial sector. That alone is not sufficient. That provides high salary to very few people. It doesn't support an island. What supports an island is the residential component of it. And I'll get to that residential component, including tourism, for those who still have a bitter taste in their mouth about tourism. But the residential component is it's this formula. A lot of people spending money that goes out of their pockets into the pockets of a lot of other people. That's what a restaurant is. That's what the supermarket is. That's what the dry clean is. That's what all the fast food restaurants and the nightclubs are. That is what an economy is built around. Then you have transportation, you have public buses, you have taxis going back and forth, or Uber drivers these days, but that is built around numbers. one of the easiest way to generate numbers is tourism, but that's not the only way. The way that sits there right now, available to all of us, and also comes with a bitter taste in the mouths of many Bahamians, is second home markets. City of Freeport was built around residential homes being built. All of the waterways were cut around that being done. The land is laid out. It's all ready, all now ready to be used. What is standing in the way of it is the red tape around this idea of property ownership and permanent residency, and the cultural red tape around this idea of foreigners coming to the island of Freeport in numbers.
Okay.
You cannot ask to have a high income or a living income if you're not also saying, how do I generate that income?
Yes.
And you not generated it by me making some money and paying it to you and you paying it to the Gardiner and someone, and it just circles in this little group. There has to be an influx of money, which means the start of that scenario, me making it, paying it to you, paying it to someone else, has to be money made by someone else somewhere else and brought into this economy and infusing this economy. And the easiest way to do that, and the easiest location, the most prepared location in the entire Bahamas to do that, is the port area. The road is there, the roads are there, the infrastructure is there, the utilities are there, the telephone lines are there, the cable is there. Everything is ready. What is not ready is the mindset of the people. To say we want foreigners coming into our country with money to spend money. Now, because most Bahamians say we will be swamped, and that's a legitimate concern, and in a generation we would have sold our birthright, which is a legitimate concern. Other countries have managed that. When you go into Saudi Arabia or into Singapore, they allow foreigners in, but they don't allow foreigners to own property. They allow foreigners in, but their children do not become citizens of those countries. And so they say, you can come here to retire, you could come here to vacation, you will own your property under a lease for 99 years or 80 years. The life of the property is only 40 years anyway, before most houses have to be torn down and rebuilt. And so you can have a structure in place, a legal structure in place that deals with ownership. Ownership is, you have ownership, but before you sell it to someone else, you have to sell it to the government or sell it to a Bahamian. And you could deal with citizenship. You can come in and have your babies, but they're not citizens of the Bahamas. They're citizens of the country that you're from. Legislate it. And then we legislate what permanent residency means, what home ownership means.
What it looks like, right.
That you don't have to be wondering every year whether the immigration guy is going to renew your permit to come here, or whether you're ever going to get this permanent residency, and who do you have to pay off to do it. You bring certainty, economic certainty. And that is the most valuable thing to the retirees in Florida. They're not coming here to have children. They're retirees.
No, they're retired.
They're coming here to have a spot to spend the money they've earned all of their lives. The persons who are looking at a digital occupation where they basically, we've experienced this during COVID. Most of us were working from home. I was working from home or from my office without my staff who were working from home or coming in. And so there's a digital employment platform now that can operate from anywhere. Why would you want to be, as a foreign person, in a cold country, congested country, and all the craziness going on in these countries when you could be in the Bahamas? Why? We are not marketing and selling what we have. As the Port Authority and the government, meaning land, licenses on one hand, Port Authority, government in terms of taxes and immigration, but also the Bahamian people in terms of our mindset. That we believe, we know we're very small in numbers. We have a very large land mass and water mass, and we don't want to be inundated with everyone from everywhere else. Think it through and pass legislation and not let that happen.
Right. I just want to say that in terms of the people of us, if this is legislated and legislated correctly, I think that we would see, while of course there will always be some who will not agree, but I believe that there will be many who were reluctant because they feel like, oh, we're going to lose ourselves, we're going to be overrun. You're saying this is what we have legislated and this is what we're going to enforce, which then makes the idea of as Rashad is saying, condos, retirement homes, vacation homes, hospices, more palatable to the average Grand Bahamian who has a love for this place and just see it.
And who will be the only ones who can own land? Bahamians alone will be able to buy new land. Everyone will be able to build homes and own land. and the government will have it revert back. Let me point this out. Not just is Freeport poised for that, but the port area will then become an incubator of this idea for the entire Bahamas. Let's test it out. Don't pass a legislation saying you could do this anywhere in the Bahamas. Pass legislation saying, as an adjunct, as a fleshing out of the Hawksbill Creek Agreement, and as a development stimulus for the port area, we're going to legislate this for home ownership, home leases, retirement homes, condos in the port area. Your land will go up in value overnight. All these people who own all this land over the bridge that was flooded the other day and are basically trying to figure out how to repair their homes, their land will be worth so much money immediately. We will see, I would estimate easily, conservative number, 5,000 homes a year being built in Grand Bahama. It's just a matter of putting the laws in place and then marketing this into the U.S., particularly the southern U.S., and not forgetting Europe. Europe has the same issue. Europe is now going through the prospect of a third world war. There's money to be moved throughout the world. The question is, some people will want a home, but a lot of people would want luxury condos. They will buy these before these are built. The Port Authority will then have service charges over those condos, over that land. As a part of this redevelopment exercise, the government can pass legislation saying that even if the Port Authority has fixed service charges as a part of this, it has the right to increase service charges. All of this is possible under our laws, except, I would say, anyway, there are ifs and buts there, and I don't want to give away the whole shop, but that is doable. The last point I want to mention is doable for the port area, but this extends as to why we don't have development and how you can unclog the pipeline on that development. Is the role of the central bank in the Bahamas. The central bank is still thinking of itself as a kind of colonial predecessor to the central bank, meaning at the one point they were just the trade board for the government. They just help the government figure out things, but they're now a central bank. The central banks in Europe have started to redefine what a central bank is. The IMF has put out some papers redefining what a central bank, especially in development countries, can be. One of those points, just one of many points that are available to us now, there are points to solve our national debt issue, for instance. But again, I've reached out to people to talk about that, but they don't want to talk about that. But the central bank role in national development can be that it expands its role beyond being what it is now, the bank to the government and the bank to other banks. Meaning when the government needs money, the central bank can loan them money, can buy treasury bills, can buy registered stock, etc. And when the local banks need money, the central bank can loan them money. Simply print it and loan it to them on terms where they can get it back in Bahamian dollar currency. What the other central banks are realizing in Europe, in the US, in the IMF itself, is that central banks in developing countries can now be a banker of last resort to people. Not just to the government.
How does that work?
Take, for instance, any industry that we want to see developed. Fishing. We need boats so the Dominicans are not coming here. We have our big boats out there catching our own fish, and the Defense Force is able to run everyone else off. And our fish don't either get poached or die of old age in the water. But our Bahamian fishermen, very competent, have no access to capital. Unless you're from Spanish Wells or something else where you have a history of being in this business, you will never have access to capital. A central bank can be a banker of last resort for business development. Business development in terms of boats, business development in terms of farming, business development in terms of mariculture and all these other things that are out there, business development in terms of tourism products. People in the settlements outside of Grand Bahama own generational property but cannot get money to develop tourism products in those properties. There should be a role of the central bank where the central bank says, listen, go and shop your idea, come with a good business plan, have it endorsed by an accountant, which can be in a small business center from the Chamber of Commerce or from the government, have it reviewed by an attorney, bring us your business plan, but first go to every commercial bank and see if they will finance you. And bring us a letter from them refusing to finance you. And if that is so, they won't finance you, and your idea is a viable idea, we will finance you directly through our business development arm of the central bank.
One of my viewers is saying that the Bahamas Development Bank offers those services, but do they offer?
But they don't have the money. They don't have the money. You can make the Bahamas Development Bank the business arm of the central bank, but the Bahamas Development Bank don't have the money. I'm talking about the bank that prints the money. I'm talking about what they do in the States. When the Federal Reserve gets involved in stimulating the economy, that's printed money. And I'm not saying be reckless about printing money.
Right.
It's money for value. We'll not just give you money, central bank, but we will invest in your project, generate value, watch disbursement of the money, stage payments, etc. And we have a mortgage over that property, central bank, or our business development arm, the central bank, and we realize our return from it. But there's nothing wrong with that role of a central bank. I personally don't support the idea of just pumping it into the Bahamas Development Bank and saying, have a good go at it. I support the idea of legislating what that means, having a proper overview of how that money is managed, having a proper overview with the private sector on how those loans are given, so that they aren't just given out as normal to any political friend of the people in charge.
Right.
But we have no shortage of the means of doing these things. It's just, and I'm not even going to say we have a shortage of ideas, because I've put some stuff out. That's just really the tip of the kind of ideas that are out there.
And I have to interject here. I just want to say, what you're presenting, I don't want to say that these things are simple, because we know that there's work. There has to be work behind it. But what I want to say are these are ideas, these are achievable goals. So where is the disconnect? This is you and I and my viewers having a conversation. I'm confused.
I believe I know where
conversations happening at a higher level, at a decision-making level. Where is the disconnect?
I could venture a view on that, but it would poison the conversation.
Yeah.
And I don't want to poison the conversation. I'd like to see some people in positions of influence and power take up the idea as their own and flesh it out. But I would suggest this, that there's nothing so easy as to do what you've always done. And there's something challenging about branching out in a different direction.
Especially when what you've always done is no longer working.
Yeah, it's something
it
about
no longer serves you.
But where I would want to suggest that we are missing another resource, not land, not taxes, not central bank, is in the capital of our people that the capital has been developed over so many decades, including our younger professional class that are being educated all over the world and have competencies in these areas. And we will hire foreign consultants and easily pay them $200,000 without worrying about it. But we have an issue with paying our own professional class to do that.
Yes.
And I believe that we have to see it a bit like Israel sees the Jews throughout the world, that there's a diaspora of Bahamians who are very competent and who don't need to return home and bring all their stuff and cast it in with us and hope for the best, but who can bring skill sets to this country and help us to develop it and be paid for doing so. And they don't have to return home, but their skill sets can be focused on their homeland. I think that's one issue. And I think, the worst thing that's happening in this country right now, we're looking at the U.S. with the confirmation hearings for the prospective new Supreme Court judge. And we're seeing the partisanship. I mean, that's a polite word now.
Yeah, very.
Almost civil war between the Democrats and the Republicans and the ideologies that they represent. And we look at that and we wonder what's going on. But truth be told, that's here also. We are so political, so partisan in the way we look at everything. Everything is filtered through whether it benefits our party or not, our team or not. I like to say our tribe or not. And at the end of the day, someone has to step up beyond that. I have extremely high hopes for the present administration, in that we have gone through so much and exposed so much that doesn't work in this country over so many administrations, that right now this administration has an opportunity to look afresh, see what doesn't work. It has a tremendous mandate to go and do something so that we can bring our national debt under control. We can avoid the IMF. We can redevelop the port area and Nassau and so on. And so it has a tremendous mandate for new thinking. And so I am hopeful that, bearing in mind they've not even been in place for a year, right. I am hopeful that after having done the triage that they're doing now, that water and someone is bleeding, you have to cut off the leg and stop the bleeding rather than trying to save the leg. After having done the economic triage and political triage they're doing now, I am hopeful that they will then move on to another phase, which is, okay, we've stopped the worst of it. Now let's move to our plan for developing. And I'm
Yes.
looking forward to seeing that happen because they have all the tools necessary and all the mandate from the people necessary. The desperation of the people, not just looking at our own finances, but looking at the world around us, having come out of 2 years of COVID and looking at how easily things can fall apart. The country as a whole is saying, show us a way out. And I'm hopeful in that second phase that they're able to do that. But I wouldn't want to poison the water by
Right.
suggesting other impediments are in place right now. Those impediments can be swept away by mindful oversight and mindful involvement of the government in it. And let's move on to a new. That's interesting. A new day. That's interesting.
Yeah, certainly. And
That's
and I
funny.
really didn't expect you to delve into, because my thing is really not to I don't want to cast
Not to
blame.
make light of that. I'm looking forward to that new day. I hope we get there.
Yeah. But what we want to see is Grand Bahama get back on its feet.
Hmm.
And it isn't going to take just the Grand Bahama Port Authority to do that.
Yeah.
It isn't going to take just the government. It's going to take, like you said, that partnership. And I've seen and that's been one of the things that I have been having in, just conversations, that it's almost like a shifting of the blame. Well, look over there because you need to tell them why things aren't working in Freeport. Well, like you pointed out, the government is a 7.5% shareholder in the Grand Bahama Port Authority. So who is sitting at their table representing the government?
I agree.
We have to ask that question. So it can't be a situation where you have your eyes closed and you're like, boy, they aren't talking to us. Hey, you're a shareholder. We need to have a conversation. Sharon is saying, I truly wish that we as a people, I wish that we as a people could truly work together for the betterment of this country. We have the answers, but we often turn a deaf ear because of the color that we believe the answer is covered in. And I think that is truth. That is truth. We can't hear beyond the noise of color. And it is what is keeping us back. We have become, and we are our own worst enemy. Sometimes I believe that it is intentionally designed to be so. Maybe people say I'm a conspiracy theorist, and I can work with that. I can accept that. But what I will say is I believe oftentimes that governments and other agencies thrive on the fact that we are so easily divided based on our political support, but
In
it's not working.
in a
It's not
country
working
where
for the
there are
better of
very
the country.
in a country where there are very few opportunities for employment in the government sector becomes something to be desired for most people. And
Yes.
once that is so, most people will do whatever they have to do that. And therefore, it becomes distorted. That's not an indictment per se, it is in a sense, but it's also a recognition of a reality that to grow this and also to move people away from this partisan way of thinking. I need a job and I will not get it unless my party wins. Therefore, I'll do anything to get my party to win. Having gotten it to win, I'm looking for a payment by job or kind, etc. To get away from that, you have to have an alternative. And that's developing the economy as a whole. And that idea about the central bank, let me just add one thing to it. The interest rate you pay to the commercial banks is the central bank's discount rate, they call it.
Mm.
The commercial banks call it the prime rate. It can theoretically be different, but it's the same one. Plus the profits of the commercial banks are building into it. You can imagine that the central bank is moving into development, stimulating development in the country, and charges the local person the same rate that it charges to the other banks, the same 4.75% rate, and oversees that investment and says, if you default, we're going to take your rate higher retroactively. Legislation is in place to allow it. And so on paper, the rate is 7%, but we will give you 4.75% so long as you are compliant with us in terms of providing information and pushing the job, et cetera, et cetera. There are creative ways to do this. And I could see easily people dismissing it. But if you go and read on what the European central banks are doing, what the Federal Reserve really is, another central bank, and what the IMF itself is saying, you'll see that that is not an innovation. That's not new. That's not something that,
Right.
that is the way central banks are supposed to work right now. And that's where the Bahamian dollars are, which are needed to stimulate this economy. I mean, it's just a tip of the iceberg on what the capacity of the central bank is. But that's one that's relevant to this discussion.
Greg, I do have a question for you, but let me just read this comment by C. Allen. C. Allen, thank you so much for tuning in. There is no limit to capital now except our imagination. FinTech and DeFi, please forgive me if I'm not pronouncing it correctly, and other emerging and nascent technologies have removed the controls and limitations of the past. If only we get past the decades of economic oppression and conditioning, we must just start conversations of thought rather than the talk we have become used to. We are in the first hyper-digital, hyper-connected realities revolution, second digital revolution, third technological revolution, and fourth industrial revolution, and fifth social revolution. I think that's what you were going to say. But if we see ourselves, I believe, on the precipice of something new, better, more innovative, if we see ourselves on the precipice of that, and then we move from that into making those changes, I believe that we can get somewhere in not just Grand Bahama, but in the Bahamas. But we have to be able to allow everyone a seat at the table, meaning leave the colors. We just want the ideas that have been fleshed out, that are workable, that have been happening and working in other countries who may have far less than what we have in terms of what is needed. And that is where it's going to come from. And it's going to take us as a people pushing for this and demanding that it happens, and then being committed, I believe, to doing the work of it happening. But one of the questions, I want to go back to something that you said earlier when we talked about taxes in terms of the airport, and that the port has their taxes and the government has their taxes. Two things. And the first thing is the port still collecting taxes if the government now owns the airport?
I don't know. And I must say, I don't know that the government owns the airport. I've read the stories in the papers just like others have, but I don't know that that was ever consummated or that the government owns the airport. Maybe, maybe not. I don't know.
Wow. I can't believe it. And the other thing is, because I'm like, it has me stumped that you're saying that the taxes that the government collects is from the airport, the departure taxes that they collect, does not go back into the airport. It just goes into that black hole I call the consolidated fund.
None, yeah. As far as I'm
And
aware, I
there is
don't see that.
absolutely nothing that we can do about that.
And I see that's a different question, and that takes us into these marches and these. I'm not one of those persons, and I'm not trying to put down other people who are into that. My view is that the role. Let me say it this way: Ukraine was extremely divided politically, and President Zelensky didn't have the support of the majority of the people until a war came. He now has 90-something% support in his country, but it took a tragedy to cause that to happen. We are in the midst of a tragedy. We're in the midst of massive unemployment, massive debt. What is not happening is we are not seeing it as a collective problem. We're seeing it as a problem for those who are on the outside while we're on the inside, or while our job is still holding on by a thread or whatever else. What I'm suggesting is that the position, that's why I use the word triage. The position right now should be that we are in a midst of crisis. The national debt cannot be left to hang over us without us paying a price at some point. We saw what happened in Jamaica with the IMF about 3 decades ago. And it's taken them all of that 3 decades to even come close to being what they were before, and they're still not there. We are one of the largest economies on this side of the world, the most prosperous economy in the Caribbean. But our national debt is unsustainable. at the present level with the present tax base? And the answer people will say is increased taxes. That's the old answer. That's why I was against VAT. That's why I'm still against VAT. It's an old um, cause and effect. We need more money. Let's take it from right here. Taxes we're used to, rather than saying how do we rationalize this tax structure and equitably collect taxes. But more than that, how do we generate more economic activity which produces taxes and doesn't feel burdensome to the people because there's money left in their pockets? And that's why I'm saying the thinking has to go beyond the what we're familiar with.
Yeah.
That, oh, we only have these businesses. Tourism hasn't worked in Grand Bahama. We only have the industrial sector, blah, blah, blah. Let me make this point because I want to make sure I've made this point. The economic development, the success of Grand Bahama is not just for the benefit of Grand Bahama. The Bahamas itself cannot succeed, cannot get out of the mess that it's in without Grand Bahama succeeding. Grand Bahama has the largest population base outside of New Providence. Grand Bahama has the infrastructure that's already paid for, that require no new capital injection from the public treasury in order to spur economic development. Grand Bahama has the land and the homes. We can relieve unemployment in New Providence by creating employment in Grand Bahama. We can relieve social pressures in New Providence. This is not a discussion about how to fix Grand Bahama, how to fix Freeport. It's about one of the major components in how to fix the Bahamas.
Well said. Well said. There's a question, I don't know if you can answer it, from Jay Bryce. He's saying VAT on service charge in Freeport in the bonded area. Mr. Moss, why?
VAT is on service charges in Freeport in the bonded
area.
That depends on a lot of things. I couldn't answer that yet. That's a legal question, and in another forum I can answer.
Okay, so
it's a good question to put to the Port Authority.
You can, and if you want to query that, Mr. Moss is a practicing attorney, so
no way. I won't have everyone writing in with their legal questions. No, I will not do that.
No. I was going to tell them to make an appointment at your office.
If they want legal advice.
We're not offering free legal
Other
advice.
than that, take it to the Port Authority or the Chamber of Commerce if you're a business in the light industrial area, and let them find an answer for you. If you need legal advice, and service charges is relatively small point to engage legal counsel, but you should be able to get that answer from the Port Authority or the Chamber of Commerce.
Thank you. Well, we are at 7:07. This has been such an excellent conversation of not just, and this is going to tickle Seattle, not just feelings, but thought. And so I want to say thank you, Greg Moss, for spending this time with us. We went a little over our time, but I don't think anybody noticed. But I promised I wouldn't keep you past 7:10, and we're getting to that. So I do want to say, though, that please keep yourself open. We have to have you back. We have to have you back when we sit down and we map the way forward for Grand Bahama and then present our ideas to whoever we're going to do that to. But certainly, I would love to have you back as a guest on Mixed Views if it works for you. This has been an enlightening conversation, so much good sound information. So I just want to say thank you so much on behalf of Mixed Views and my MVVs. We appreciate you. MVVs, this was a great show. Information. They say knowledge is power. We have been empowered, and let's not just let it stay right here on this show. Well, our time is up, and I want to say thank you as always for tuning in. It is the weekend, and you know what I like to say. Use this opportunity to spend time with loved ones, families, friends. Let them know how much you love and appreciate them. Hug on them. Do all of that wonderful thing and be safe out there. But most of all, generally, let's just be kind to each other. It does not cost us anything to be kind to each other. As always, I want to shout out to all of my people in Canada. So that's Adriana, Andre, Destiny, and Antonio tuning in. Guys, you know what? I got to thank Mark Gardiner. Y'all know why? because I just got to thank Mark Gardiner, but also because he was able to speak with Greg Moss on my behalf, and Greg is here. So, Mark, we're not just thanking you tonight because you know we got to thank you. We're thanking you tonight because you became my booking agent and you did an excellent job. So, thank you. And so, everyone, until next week, Friday, same time, same place, Mixed Views Live with Laverne. Have a wonderful weekend. Be safe. Bye.
Bye.